The morning sun cast long shadows across the Naval Special Warfare Training Center in Coronado, California. Commander Sarah Mitchell stepped out of her rental car and took a deep breath of the salt-tinged air. At 32, she had already made a name for herself in naval intelligence, but today felt different. Today, she wasn't here for a briefing or consultation. She was here because of a conversation that had been eating at her for months. The conversation had started innocently enough during a joint operations meeting 6 months earlier. She'd been presenting intelligence analysis to a room full of special operations commanders when the topic shifted to physical fitness standards. One of the SEAL commanders, a weathered veteran named Captain Jake Morrison, had made an offhand comment about how certain records at the training center hadn't been touched in over a decade. "What kind of records?" Sarah had asked, her curiosity piqued. Morrison had chuckled. Not unkindly, but with the confidence of someone who'd seen countless attempts fail. The obstacle course record. For one, set by Lieutenant Commander Rick Torres back in 2013, 11 minutes and 43 seconds. "We've had some of our best candidates come within 30 seconds of it, but nobody's even come close to breaking it." Sarah had nodded politely at the time, filed the information away, and continued with her presentation. But something about that moment stuck with her. It wasn't the record itself that bothered her. It was the underlying assumption in Morrison's voice. The assumption that this record was somehow untouchable, that the men who had tried and failed represented the absolute peak of human capability in that particular challenge. Over the following weeks, Sarah found herself researching the obstacle course at Coronado. She studied videos, read training manuals, and even reached out to former SEALs who had attempted the record. What she discovered surprised her. The course was incredibly demanding, but it wasn't just about raw strength or speed. It required strategy, technique, and mental fortitude. These were areas where Sarah had always excelled. Sarah Mitchell wasn't your typical naval officer. She had grown up on a ranch in Montana, where physical work wasn't just encouraged, it was necessary for survival. Her father had raised her and her 3 brothers with the same expectations and standards. By the age of 16, she could outwork most of the seasonal ranch hands her father hired. She could rope cattle, repair fences in sub-zero temperatures, and had once single-handedly pulled a stuck calf out of a frozen pond during a blizzard. When she joined the Navy at 18, Sarah had quickly distinguished herself, not just academically, but physically. She'd always been competitive, but more than that, she had an analytical mind that approached physical challenges like puzzles to be solved, rather than walls to be overcome through brute force. Her specialty in naval intelligence had taken her all over the world. She'd spent time embedded with various special operations units, not as a combatant, but as an intelligence liaison. She'd crawled through tunnels in Afghanistan, rappelled down cliffs in Norway, and completed survival training in some of the harshest environments on Earth. Each experience had taught her something new about her own capabilities and limitations. But it was during a training exercise in Bulgaria 2 years earlier that Sarah had first realized she might be capable of more than anyone, including herself, had imagined. The exercise involved a complex obstacle course designed to test the limits of NATO Special Forces. Sarah had been there in an advisory capacity, helping to design scenarios based on intelligence about enemy capabilities. On the final day of the exercise, one of the participating teams had been short a member due to injury. The exercise coordinator, a British SAS colonel, had jokingly asked if any of the observers wanted to fill in. Sarah had volunteered, thinking it would give her better insight into the physical demands her intelligence needed to account for. What happened next had surprised everyone, Sarah included. She'd not only completed the course, but had done so faster than several of the Special Forces operators. Her time hadn't been record-breaking, but it had been competitive. More importantly, her approach had been different. Where others relied primarily on strength and speed, Sarah had identified the most efficient paths, the optimal techniques for each obstacle, and had maintained a steady pace that many of the others couldn't match. After the exercise, several of the Special Forces operators had approached her with a mixture of curiosity and respect. They wanted to know about her training background, her approach to the course, and whether she'd ever considered special operations herself. Sarah had laughed off the suggestions at the time, but the conversations had planted a seed. Now, Standing outside the gates of the Coronado training facility, that seed had grown into something she couldn't ignore. She wasn't here to prove a point about gender equality or to make a political statement. She was here because she genuinely believed she could break a record that had stood for over a decade. And she wanted to find out if she was right. The guard at the gate recognized her from her previous visits to the base. "Morning, Commander Mitchell. Here for another briefing? Actually, I'm here to see Captain Morrison. I have an appointment." The guard checked his list and waved her through. Sarah drove slowly through the base, taking in the sights and sounds of one of the most elite training facilities in the world. Groups of SEAL candidates were already out running, their instructors shouting encouragement and criticism in equal measure. The famous bell that candidates rang when they quit stood silent in the morning air. But Sarah knew that before the day was over, several more dreams would likely end with the sound of that bell. Captain Morrison's office was located in a building overlooking the obstacle course that had become the focus of Sarah's attention. The course itself looked deceptively simple from a distance, but Sarah knew that appearances could be deceiving. She'd studied every inch of it through photographs and videos. She knew the height of every wall, the distance of every jump, and the technique required for every traverse. Morrison's secretary, a friendly woman in her 50s, smiled as Sarah entered. "Commander Mitchell? Captain Morrison is expecting you. Go right in." Morrison's office was exactly what Sarah had expected. The walls were covered with photographs of SEAL teams, certificates of achievement, and memorabilia from operations around the world. Morrison himself was an imposing figure, tall and broad-shouldered, with graying hair and eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. "Commander Mitchell," Morrison said, standing to shake her hand. "I have to admit, when you called and said you wanted to discuss that obstacle course record we talked about, I wasn't sure what to expect." Sarah took the offered chair across from Morrison's desk. "I appreciate you taking the time to see me, Captain. I know this probably seems unusual." "Unusual is one word for it," Morrison said with a slight smile. "Help me understand what you have in mind." Sarah had rehearsed this conversation dozens of times. But now that the moment had arrived, she found herself speaking more directly than she'd planned. "I want to attempt the obstacle course record. I believe I can break it." Morrison's expression didn't change, but Sarah caught a slight pause before he responded. "Commander, I'm sure you're aware that this isn't just any obstacle course. This is a course designed to push some of the most physically capable people in the world to their absolute limits." The current record holder, Torres, was a triathlete before he joined the SEALs. He'd been training on this specific course for months before he set that record. "I understand that," Sarah replied. "I've done my research. I know what the course involves, and I know what the record means. I'm not asking for special treatment or modifications. I want to attempt it under the same conditions as everyone else." Morrison leaned back in his chair, studying Sarah with the same intensity she imagined he brought to evaluating SEAL candidates. "What makes you think you can succeed where others have failed?" It was a fair question, and one Sarah had been asking herself for months. "I think I have a different approach. I've analyzed video of the attempts that have come closest to the record, and I think I've identified areas where time can be saved through technique, rather than just speed or strength. Such as..." Sarah pulled out a notebook she'd been carrying and opened it to a page covered with diagrams and notes. "The rope climb, for example. Most people approach it as a pure strength exercise, trying to power their way up as quickly as possible. But there's a technique that rock climbers use for long ascents that's more efficient. It uses leg strength and body positioning to conserve upper body strength while maintaining speed." Morrison glanced at the notes, and Sarah could see she had his attention. "What else?" "The wall traverse. Everyone tries to move across it as quickly as possible, but that requires maintaining a grip that's incredibly taxing on the forearms. There's a rhythm that can be established that's actually faster over the full distance because it prevents the grip fatigue that slows people down in the final third of the traverse." Sarah continued through her analysis of each obstacle, explaining her planned approach with the same methodical precision she brought to intelligence analysis. Morrison listened without interruption, occasionally nodding or making notes of his own. When Sarah finished, Morrison was quiet for a long moment. Finally, he spoke. Commander, what you're describing shows a lot of thought and preparation. But thinking about the course and actually completing it are two very different things. This record has stood for over 10 years not because people haven't tried to break it, but because it represents something close to the human limit for this particular challenge. I understand that, Sarah said. But I also think that sometimes limits exist, not because they're absolute, but because everyone approaches them the same way. I want to try a different approach. Morrison stood and walked to the window overlooking the course. Several SEAL candidates were currently making their way through it, their movements powerful but inefficient compared to what Sarah had envisioned. You know, Commander, in all my years here, I've learned that the people who surprise you the most are usually the ones you least expect to succeed. He turned back to Sarah. Tell me about your physical preparation. This conversation is academic, unless you have the physical capability to execute these techniques you've described. Sarah had been hoping he would ask. She'd spent the last 6 months preparing for this moment, with the same dedication she'd brought to every other challenge in her career. I've been training specifically for this course for 6 months. I work with a former Olympic climbing coach for technique development. I've been doing altitude training to improve my cardiovascular efficiency, and I've been practicing the specific movement patterns required for each obstacle. Where have you been practicing? The obstacles on this course are pretty specific, Sarah smiled. I built replicas. My father still owns that ranch in Montana I grew up on. I spent my last leave constructing scaled versions of each obstacle and practicing the techniques I've developed. Morrison raised an eyebrow. You built your own obstacle course? The important parts of it, yes. Obviously, I can't perfectly replicate the conditions here, but I've been able to test my approaches and refine my techniques. Morrison returned to his desk and sat down. Commander, assuming for a moment that I'm willing to let you make this attempt, what exactly are you proposing? Sarah had thought about this carefully. I'd like to make the attempt under the same conditions as any official record attempt. Full military observers, official timing, the whole process. If I fail publicly. If I succeed, the record should be recognized officially. And what about the potential for injury? This course has put people in the hospital. I understand the risks. I'm willing to assume them. I've had a full physical, and I'm in excellent health. I've trained for this specific challenge more thoroughly than I've trained for anything else in my life. Morrison was quiet again, clearly weighing his decision. Sarah could see him considering not just her request, but the implications of approving it. If she failed badly, it could reflect poorly on his judgment. If she succeeded, it would certainly attract attention. Much of it focused on questions about why no one had considered her approach before. Finally, Morrison spoke. Commander, I'm going to approve your request. But with conditions. Sarah felt her heart rate spike. What conditions? First, you'll need to complete a preliminary run through the course to demonstrate basic competency. I'm not going to let you attempt an official record run if you can't safely complete the course at all. That's fair. Second, you'll do the preliminary run with one of our instructors present to evaluate your safety and technique. If he has concerns, we stop. Understood. Third, if you pass the preliminary evaluation, we'll schedule the official attempt for 2 weeks later. That gives you time to adjust based on the instructor's feedback and gives us time to arrange proper observation and timing. Sarah nodded. When can we do the preliminary run? Morrison checked his calendar. How about Thursday morning? That gives you a few days to get familiar with the actual obstacles, as opposed to your replicas. Thursday morning is perfect. Morrison stood and extended his hand. Commander, I hope you know what you're getting yourself into. This record has stood as long as it has for good reasons. Sarah shook his hand, feeling the calluses that spoke of years of hard training. I appreciate the opportunity, Captain. I won't disappoint you. As Sarah left Morrison's office, she felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness that she hadn't experienced since her first deployment. She had 3 days to prepare for what could either vindicate months of training and analysis or end in public failure. Walking back to her car, Sarah passed the obstacle course where SEAL candidates were still training. She stopped for a moment to watch them, noting their techniques and comparing them to her planned approaches. Several of the instructors noticed her watching and nodded respectfully. They had no idea that in just a few days, she would be attempting something that none of their best students had been able to accomplish. That evening, Sarah called her father from her hotel room. The conversation was brief, as most of their conversations were, but she could hear the pride in his voice when she told him about the opportunity Morrison had given her. "You've been preparing for this your whole life, Sarah," her father said. "Not just the last 6 months, but everything we did on the ranch. Every challenge you took on in the Navy. Every time you refused to accept that something was impossible. This is just the next step." As Sarah hung up the phone, she realized her father was right. This wasn't really about breaking a record or proving a point. It was about continuing to push the boundaries of what she was capable of, the same way she had been doing since she was a child pulling calves out of frozen ponds. She spent the next hour reviewing her notes one more time, visualizing each obstacle and the techniques she planned to use. Tomorrow, she would get her first look at the actual course she'd been studying for months. In 3 days, she would find out if all her preparation had been enough. Outside her hotel window, the lights of Coronado twinkled in the darkness, and somewhere in that darkness was a course that had humbled some of the most elite athletes in the world. In just a few days, Sarah Mitchell would find out if she could do what no one had done in over a decade. Thursday morning arrived with a marine layer that shrouded the Coronado training facility in gray mist. Sarah had been awake since 4 a.m., not from nerves, but from the same focused energy she'd felt before every major challenge in her life. She'd eaten a carefully planned breakfast, completed her usual mobility routine, and arrived at the base 30 minutes early. The obstacle course looked different in person than it had in the countless videos she'd studied. It was bigger, more imposing, with steel and concrete obstacles that showed the wear of thousands of attempts. The course stretched nearly half a mile and included 12 distinct obstacles, each designed to test a different aspect of physical and mental capability. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Rodriguez was waiting for her when she arrived. Rodriguez was a compact man in his early 40s, with the kind of build that spoke of functional strength rather than gym muscle. His reputation preceded him. Sarah had learned during her research that Rodriguez had been an instructor at Coronado for over 15 years and had personally trained some of the most elite operators in the SEAL community. "Commander Mitchell," Rodriguez said, extending a firm handshake. "Captain Morrison briefed me on what you're planning. I have to say, it's ambitious. I appreciate you taking the time to evaluate me." "Chief," Rodriguez gestured toward the course. "Let's walk through it first. I want to see what you think you know. And I'll tell you what the obstacles are really like when you're running them at speed." They started at the beginning of the course, where a sign displayed the current record, 11 minutes and 43 seconds, set by Lieutenant Commander Rick Torres on September 15, 2013. Below that was a list of the 10 fastest times ever recorded. The gap between Torres's record and the second-place time was significant, nearly 30 seconds. "Torres was special," Rodriguez said, noticing Sarah's attention on the board. "I was here when he set that record. It was one of those performances where everything came together perfectly. He'd been training for it for months, and on that day, he was flawless." The first obstacle was a rope climb. 30 feet of thick manila rope hanging over a sand pit. It looked straightforward, but Sarah knew from her research that it had ended more attempts than any other single obstacle. Most people burned out their grip strength here and couldn't recover for the later obstacles that required hand and arm strength. "Most people attack this like it's a sprint," Rodriguez explained. "They try to power up it as fast as possible. But if you burn out your forearms here, you're done before you get halfway through the course." Sarah nodded. This was exactly what she'd anticipated. "I've been working on a technique that uses more leg strength and body positioning to preserve grip strength." "Show me." Sarah approached the rope and began to climb, using a technique she'd learned from her rock climbing coach. Instead of relying primarily on her arms, she used her legs to create a secure grip on the rope, allowing her to ascend in a rhythm that was efficient rather than explosive. Her movement was smooth and controlled, and she reached the top with her forearms still feeling fresh. Rodriguez watched intently. "That's good technique. How's your time compared to a standard approach?" "In training, it's actually slightly faster over the full course distance, because I don't lose efficiency on later obstacles." They moved to the next obstacle, a series of parallel bars that had to be traversed hand over hand for 40 yards. This was where Sarah's analysis had identified the biggest opportunity for improvement. "This is where most people make their first major mistake," Rodriguez said. "They try to move across as fast as possible, but they don't pace themselves properly." Sarah had spent hours studying videos of attempts that had come close to the record. The pattern was always the same. People would start strong on the parallel bars, moving quickly for the first half of the traverse. But their grip strength would deteriorate rapidly in the second half, causing them to slow down dramatically, or, in some cases, fall off entirely. "I think there's a rhythm that can be maintained that's actually faster overall," Sarah said. "It's about finding the pace that you can sustain for the full distance, rather than starting at maximum speed." Rodriguez gestured to the bars. "Let's see it." Sarah jumped up to the bars and began her traverse. Instead of the explosive hand-over-hand movement that most people used, she established a steady rhythm that felt almost meditative. Each movement was deliberate and efficient, with no wasted energy. Her pace looked slower than the typical approach, but she maintained it consistently across the full 40 yards. "Interesting," Rodriguez said as Sarah dropped down at the end. "You were definitely moving at a different pace than what we usually see. But your overall time was competitive. How do you feel?" Sarah flexed her hands and forearms. "Good. Ready for whatever comes next." They continued through the course, with Rodriguez explaining the challenges and Sarah demonstrating her planned approaches. At the wall climb, she used footwork techniques borrowed from rock climbing to ascend more efficiently. On the rope traverse, she employed a hand-over-hand technique that minimized the energy expenditure per movement. Each obstacle presented its own challenges, but Sarah's preparation was evident in every approach she demonstrated. The most intimidating obstacle was near the end of the course, a combination wall and rope climb that required athletes to climb a 12-foot wall, traverse a horizontal rope for 20 feet, then climb down another 12-foot wall on the other side. It was technically complex and physically demanding, and it came at a point in the course where most people were already exhausted. "This is where Torres really separated himself from everyone else," Rodriguez explained. "Most people are hanging on by their fingernails by the time they get here. Torres attacked it like it was the first obstacle." Sarah studied the obstacle carefully. She'd practiced a similar setup on her ranch, but seeing the real thing made her realize that her replica hadn't fully captured the complexity. The rope traverse in particular was more challenging than she'd anticipated, with the rope positioned at an angle that required more upper body strength than she'd planned for. "Can I try this one a couple of times?" Sarah asked. "I want to make sure I have the technique right." "Sure, but remember, this is just the evaluation run. Don't wear yourself out before the real attempt." Sarah approached the obstacle and began her ascent of the first wall. Her movement was clean and efficient, but when she reached the rope traverse, she immediately felt the difference from her training setup. The angle was more severe, and the rope had a slight swing that she hadn't accounted for. She made it across, but her technique felt rougher than she'd planned. "That didn't feel right," she said after completing the obstacle. Rodriguez nodded. "What felt different?" Sarah explained what she'd noticed, and Rodriguez helped her understand the nuances of the real obstacle compared to her training setup. They talked through several technical adjustments that would help her adapt her approach. "Want to try it again?" Sarah's second attempt was much cleaner. The technical adjustments Rodriguez had suggested made a significant difference, and she completed the obstacle with the efficiency she'd been aiming for. They finished walking through the entire course, with Sarah demonstrating her approach to each obstacle, and Rodriguez providing feedback and suggestions. By the time they were done, Sarah felt confident that her techniques were sound, but she also had a much deeper appreciation for the challenge she was facing. "All right, Commander," Rodriguez said as they returned to the starting line. "Time for the full run. Remember, this isn't about setting the record today. This is about proving that you can complete the course safely and that your techniques work under pressure." Sarah nodded and began her pre-run routine, a series of movements designed to activate her nervous system and prepare her body for the intense effort ahead. She'd developed the routine over months of training, and it helped her feel focused and calm. "Whenever you're ready," Rodriguez said, stopwatch in hand. Sarah approached the starting line and took a deep breath. She'd visualized this moment countless times, but now that it was here, she felt a clarity and focus that surprised her. All the months of preparation, analysis, and training had led to this moment. "Ready," she said. "Go." Sarah exploded off the starting line, her pace controlled but aggressive. She reached the rope climb in seconds and began her ascent. Using the leg-assisted technique she'd perfected, her movement was smooth and rhythmic, and she reached the top with her arms feeling strong and ready for the challenges ahead. The parallel bars were next, and Sarah immediately established the steady rhythm she'd practiced. She could feel the temptation to move faster, especially knowing that Rodriguez was timing her. But she stuck to her plan. The rhythm felt sustainable, and she maintained it across the full traverse without any loss of efficiency. Obstacle after obstacle, Sarah's preparation showed. At the wall climb, her footwork was precise and efficient. On the rope traverse, her hand-over-hand technique looked almost effortless. She moved through the course with a consistency that was impressive, maintaining her pace and technique even as the accumulated fatigue began to build. The combination wall and rope climb presented the challenge she'd expected. Her first wall ascent went smoothly, but when she reached the rope traverse, she could feel the effects of the previous obstacles in her grip strength. This was the moment where her technique would either prove itself or fail. Sarah began the traverse, using the adjusted approach Rodriguez had helped her develop. The movement felt more challenging than in her practice, but her technique held. She made it across the rope and began the descent down the final wall, her confidence building with each movement. The final obstacles passed in a blur of controlled aggression and precise technique. Sarah's pace never wavered, and her movement remained clean and efficient. When she crossed the finish line, she felt strong and controlled, not like someone who had just pushed themselves to their absolute limit. Rodriguez was waiting with his stopwatch, but his expression was unreadable. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Good," Sarah said, and she meant it. "Tired, but good. Like I could do it again if I had to." Rodriguez looked at his stopwatch and then at Sarah. "Commander, that was a very impressive run. What was my time?" Rodriguez hesitated for a moment before answering. 12 minutes and 18 seconds. Sarah felt a moment of disappointment. She'd been hoping to come closer to the record, even on her evaluation run. 12 minutes and 18 seconds was a good time, but it was still 35 seconds off the record. Rodriguez must have noticed her expression. "Commander, I need you to understand something. That time puts you in the top 20 all-time on this course. On your first attempt, with techniques that were different from anything I've seen before." Sarah looked at him in surprise. "More importantly," Rodriguez continued, "your pacing was completely different from what we usually see. Most people who run under 12.5 minutes are completely exhausted at the end. They've pushed themselves to their absolute limit. You finished looking like you could do it again. What does that mean? It means your approach works. Your techniques are sound, your pacing is sustainable, and you have room to improve. In my 15 years here, I've seen maybe 5 people who had that combination on their first run." Rodriguez paused and looked back at the course. "Commander, I came into this evaluation thinking you were probably going to embarrass yourself. I've seen a lot of people who thought they had the secret to breaking records, and almost all of them were wrong." He turned back to Sarah. "But what I just watched was different. Your approach isn't just different. It's better, more efficient, more sustainable, more technically sound. If you can execute it under the pressure of an official record attempt, I think you have a real chance." Sarah felt a surge of excitement mixed with determination. The evaluation had gone better than she'd dared to hope. Her techniques worked, her preparation was sound, and she had 2 weeks to make the final adjustments that could make the difference between a good time and a record-breaking performance. "What do you recommend for the next 2 weeks?" Sarah asked. Rodriguez thought for a moment. "First, practice the combination obstacle some more. Your technique is good, but you can get more efficient with repetition. Second, work on your transition times between obstacles. You lost a few seconds here and there that could add up to significant time savings. Anything else? Trust your preparation. Your techniques are sound. Your pacing is smart. And your physical conditioning is excellent. Don't try to reinvent everything in the next 2 weeks. Refine what you have, but don't change it. They walked back toward the parking area, and Rodriguez continued to share insights and suggestions. Sarah took notes on everything, knowing that the next 2 weeks could be the difference between success and failure. As they reached the parking area, Rodriguez stopped and extended his hand. "Commander, it's been a pleasure working with you today. I'm looking forward to seeing what you can do in 2 weeks." Sarah shook his hand, feeling the respect and encouragement in his grip. "Thank you, Chief, for everything. I know this isn't the usual way things are done around here." Rodriguez smiled. "Commander, in 15 years of training, the best of the best, I've learned that the usual way isn't always the best way. Sometimes it takes someone with a different perspective to show us what's possible." As Sarah drove away from the base, she felt a combination of confidence and determination that she'd never experienced before. The evaluation had confirmed that her months of preparation had been on the right track. Her techniques worked, her approach was sound, and she had a real chance to break a record that had stood for over a decade. But she also knew that the real test was still ahead. The evaluation run had been about proving competency and safety. The official record attempt would be about executing under pressure, with observers watching and official timing recording every second. Sarah spent the rest of the day reviewing Rodriguez's feedback and planning her training for the next 2 weeks. She had a real chance to make history, but only if she could execute perfectly when it mattered most. That evening, she called her father again to update him on how the evaluation had gone. His response was typically brief but supportive. "Sounds like you're ready," he said. "Now, you just have to go do it." As Sarah hung up the phone, she realized that her father was right. The preparation was done, the techniques were proven, and the opportunity was there. In 2 weeks, she would find out if all her work had been enough to accomplish something that no one had been able to do in over 10 years. The 2 weeks following Sarah's evaluation run passed with the intensity of a military operation. Every day was carefully planned. Every training session had a specific purpose, and every detail was analyzed for potential improvement. Sarah had taken leave from her regular duties to focus entirely on preparation, and she approached the challenge with the same methodical precision that had made her successful in naval intelligence. Her training routine was unlike anything the Coronado facility had seen before. While SEAL candidates followed established protocols designed to build general fitness and mental toughness, Sarah's program was laser-focused on the specific demands of the obstacle course record. Every exercise had a direct correlation to a movement she would need to perform, and every training session was designed to refine her technique while building the precise type of fitness the record attempt would require. Chief Rodriguez had given her access to the course for 2 hours each morning, before the regular SEAL training began. These sessions became the foundation of her preparation. Sarah would run through individual obstacles repeatedly, making tiny adjustments to her technique and timing each transition with obsessive precision. The rope climb was first each morning, and Sarah used these repetitions to perfect the leg-assisted technique that would preserve her grip strength for later obstacles. She experimented with different rhythms and breathing patterns, finding the combination that allowed her to ascend quickly while using the minimum amount of upper body strength. After dozens of repetitions, Sarah discovered that she could actually climb the rope faster using her technique than most people could using pure arm strength, while expending significantly less energy. The efficiency gains were exactly what she'd hoped for, but seeing them materialize in practice gave her growing confidence that her analytical approach was sound. The parallel bars required different refinements. Sarah's steady rhythm approach was proving effective, but Rodriguez helped her identify opportunities to increase her pace without sacrificing sustainability. They worked on transitioning more efficiently between handholds and on maintaining forward momentum that would carry her through the entire traverse. During one morning session, Rodriguez timed Sarah's parallel bar traverse and shook his head in amazement. "Commander, you just completed that in the same time as Torres's record-setting run, and you look like you could immediately do it again." Sarah was pleased but not satisfied. It needs to be faster. I need to find time somewhere, and this is one of the longer obstacles. They spent the next hour working on micro adjustments to her technique. Small changes in hand positioning, subtle shifts in her rhythm, and better coordination between her upper and lower body movements. By the end of the session, Sarah had shaved 3 seconds off her parallel bar time, while maintaining the sustainability that was key to her overall strategy. The combination wall and rope climb continued to be the most technically challenging obstacle. Sarah's evaluation run had shown that her basic approach was sound, but Rodriguez helped her identify several areas for improvement. The transition from the first wall to the rope traverse was taking longer than necessary, and her descent down the final wall could be more aggressive. They practiced these transitions repeatedly, with Rodriguez timing each segment and providing immediate feedback. Sarah developed a more dynamic approach to mounting the rope that saved nearly a second, and she learned to descend the final wall with controlled speed rather than the cautious approach she'd been using. But it was during her work on the obstacle that had initially seemed simplest that Sarah found her biggest opportunity for improvement. The course included a section where participants had to crawl under a series of barriers set 18 inches off the ground for a distance of 50 yards. Most people approach this as a necessary evil to be endured, but Sarah realized it could be an opportunity to gain time. Traditional military crawling techniques were designed for stealth and safety, not speed. Sarah experimented with modified techniques borrowed from competitive obstacle racing and cave exploration. She developed an approach that was faster than the traditional military crawl while being sustainable over the full distance. The technique looked unusual, with Sarah moving in a fluid motion that was part crawl, part slide, but the results were undeniable. Rodriguez timed her crawl segment at 12 seconds faster than the average time for that obstacle, and Sarah finished the segment breathing normally rather than gasping for air. "Where did you learn to move like that?" Rodriguez asked, after watching Sarah demonstrate her crawling technique for the third time. "I spent a summer during college working on an archaeological dig in some caves in New Mexico," Sarah explained. "We had to move through tight spaces efficiently, and the traditional military crawl was too slow and too tiring for the distances we needed to cover." Rodriguez shook his head with a mixture of admiration and amusement. "Commander, in 15 years here, I've never seen anyone approach that obstacle as an opportunity to gain time rather than just something to survive." Word of Sarah's preparation began to spread through the SEAL community at Coronado. During her morning training sessions, instructors and students would often pause their own activities to watch her work through the obstacles. The attention wasn't intrusive or disrespectful, but Sarah could feel the curiosity and growing interest in what she was attempting. Some of the observers were skeptical. The record had stood for 10 years for good reasons, and many of the people watching had personal experience with just how difficult it was to achieve a time anywhere close to Torres's mark. But others were intrigued by Sarah's completely different approach and impressed by the technical precision she brought to each obstacle. Captain Morrison made a point of checking on Sarah's progress several times during the 2-week preparation period. His initial skepticism was gradually being replaced by genuine curiosity about whether her unconventional approach might actually succeed. "How's it going, Commander?" Morrison asked during one of his visits. "Good, sir. I think I'm ready." "Good, sir." Morrison watched Sarah complete a practice run of the entire course, noting the consistency of her technique and the controlled way she moved through each obstacle. "What's your time looking like in practice?" Sarah hesitated. She'd been reluctant to focus too heavily on times during practice, knowing that the pressure of an official record attempt would be different from training conditions. But her practice runs had been consistently encouraging. "I've run it under 12 minutes twice," Sarah said, "but those were in ideal conditions with no pressure." Morrison's eyebrows went up. Running the course in under 12 minutes put Sarah in very exclusive company. Only 8 people in the history of the course had achieved official times under 12 minutes, and 5 of those had been Torres himself during various attempts. "That's impressive, Commander. How do you think you'll handle the pressure of an official attempt?" It was a question Sarah had been thinking about constantly. Practice runs were one thing, but performing under pressure with official timing and observers was entirely different. She'd been in pressure situations before, but never one where her performance would be measured with such precision. I think my approach helps with pressure management, Sarah said. Because I'm not trying to push myself to my absolute physical limit. I have mental resources available to focus on technique and execution. Morrison nodded thoughtfully. That's an interesting perspective. Most record attempts I've seen are about people pushing themselves beyond what they thought was possible. Mine is about executing a plan that I know is possible, Sarah replied. I've broken the attempt down into individual components that I can control. If I execute each component correctly, the overall result should follow. The conversation highlighted something that Sarah had come to understand about her approach. Where most people saw the record attempt as a single, overwhelming challenge, she saw it as a series of technical problems that could be solved through preparation and precision execution. As the 2 weeks progressed, Sarah refined not just her physical techniques but her mental approach to the attempt. She developed visualization routines for each obstacle, mental cues for maintaining her rhythm and focus, and contingency plans for dealing with unexpected challenges. She also worked with Rodriguez to understand the specific conditions she would face during the official attempt. The course would be monitored by multiple timekeepers, with video recording for verification. There would be observers from the SEAL community and possibly higher-ranking officers from Naval Special Warfare Command. Don't let the observers distract you, Rodriguez advised. Focus on the course and your technique. Everything else is just noise. Sarah appreciated the advice, but she knew that the observers would be the least of her concerns. The real pressure would come from within, from her own expectations and her knowledge that she would have only one chance to prove that months of preparation had been worthwhile. 3 days before the official attempt, Sarah ran her final practice session on the course. Everything felt perfect. Her techniques were automatic, her timing was precise, and her confidence was at its highest level. Rodriguez timed the run and reported that it was her fastest yet, though he kept the exact time to himself. How did it feel? He asked. Like I was ready, Sarah replied. The final 2 days before the attempt were focused on recovery and mental preparation. Sarah's physical training was complete, and any additional practice would be counterproductive. Instead, she focused on rest, proper nutrition, and maintaining the mental state that would allow her to perform at her best when it mattered. She spent hours visualizing the attempt, running through each obstacle in her mind, and rehearsing her responses to various scenarios. She practiced her pre-performance routine until it became automatic, ensuring that she would be able to achieve the optimal physical and mental state, regardless of the conditions on attempt day. The night before the attempt, Sarah had dinner with Rodriguez and his family. The evening was deliberately casual, designed to keep Sarah relaxed and focused on something other than the challenge ahead. Rodriguez's wife was a former competitive swimmer, and she shared insights about managing pressure in individual sport competitions. The thing about records, she said over dessert, is that they're not really about competing against other people. They're about competing against a standard. If you can execute what you've practiced, the result will take care of itself. As Sarah returned to her hotel that evening, she felt a calm confidence that had been building throughout her preparation. She was as ready as she could possibly be. Her techniques were proven, her fitness was optimal, and her mental preparation was complete. Tomorrow, she would find out if it had been enough. She called her father one final time before the attempt. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Ready," Sarah said. "Really ready. Good. Remember, you've already proven you belong there. Tomorrow is just about doing what you've been preparing to do." After hanging up the phone, Sarah completed her evening routine and went to bed early. As she lay in the darkness, she could visualize every inch of the course that awaited her. She knew exactly what she needed to do, and she was confident in her ability to do it. The record had stood for over 10 years, not because it was impossible to break, but because no one had approached it with the right combination of technique, preparation, and execution. Sarah believed she had found that combination. Tomorrow, she would find out if she was right. The alarm was set for 5 a.m., but Sarah was awake before it rang. She felt refreshed and focused. With the clear mind and energized body that came from optimal preparation, she completed her morning routine with deliberate calm, ate the breakfast she'd planned weeks in advance, and began the final preparations for the most significant athletic challenge of her life. By the time Sarah arrived at Coronado that morning, word of the record attempt had spread throughout the base. The course was surrounded by more observers than she'd expected, including several senior officers and some of the most experienced SEAL instructors on the base. As Sarah began her pre-attempt routine, she felt the weight of expectation and curiosity from the gathered observers. But rather than feeling pressured, she felt supported. These people understood better than anyone what she was attempting to accomplish, and their presence felt more like encouragement than judgment. Captain Morrison approached as Sarah completed her warm-up routine. "Ready, Commander?" Sarah looked at the course one final time, running through her plan for each obstacle and confirming that everything felt optimal. "Ready, sir." The morning air was crisp and still as Sarah approached the starting line. The marine layer had lifted, revealing a perfect California day with unlimited visibility and no wind to affect her performance. The conditions were exactly what she had hoped for during months of visualization and preparation. Chief Rodriguez stood at the starting line with the primary stopwatch, while 2 additional timekeepers were positioned at different points along the course. A video camera had been set up to record the entire attempt for verification purposes. The setup was identical to what had been used for Torres's record-setting run 10 years earlier. Sarah took her position at the starting line and looked down the course one final time. Every obstacle was exactly as she had left it during her final practice session 3 days earlier. The rope climb stretched 30 feet into the clear sky. The parallel bars gleamed in the morning sun. The combination wall and rope climb waited at the far end. The obstacle that would either confirm her success or end her hopes. The gathered observers had arranged themselves along the course to get the best view of the attempt. Sarah could see familiar faces among the group, including several instructors who had been following her preparation with growing interest. Captain Morrison stood near the finish line, his expression serious but encouraging. Rodriguez checked his stopwatch one final time. "Commander, you know the rules. Any assistance from observers disqualifies the attempt. Any deviation from the designated path disqualifies the attempt. You have one chance to set an official time." Sarah nodded, her focus narrowing to the immediate challenge ahead. All the months of preparation, analysis, and refinement had led to this moment. She felt calm and ready, with the kind of clarity that came from complete preparation meeting optimal conditions. "On your mark," Rodriguez called out. Sarah settled into her starting position, her mind automatically running through the sequence she had practiced thousands of times. The first 30 seconds would set the tone for everything that followed. The rope climb had to be smooth and controlled. The transition to the parallel bars had to be efficient. Every movement had to be precise. "Get set." Sarah took a deep breath and felt her entire body align around the task ahead. Her heart rate was elevated but controlled. Her muscles felt loose and ready. Her mind was clear and focused on the first obstacle. "Go!" Sarah exploded off the starting line with controlled aggression. Her pace was exactly what she had practiced. Fast enough to build momentum but controlled enough to maintain efficiency throughout the entire course. She reached the rope climb in seconds and leaped up to grab the rope at the optimal height. The ascent was smooth and rhythmic, with Sarah using the leg-assisted technique that had become automatic through repetition. Her breathing was controlled, her movement was efficient, and she reached the top with her grip strength intact. The first obstacle was complete, and Sarah felt exactly as she had during her best practice runs. The transition to the parallel bars was seamless. Sarah mounted the bars at the precise angle she had practiced, and immediately established the rhythm that had proven most efficient during training. Her movement was steady and controlled, with each hand placement deliberate and efficient. As Sarah moved across the bars, she could hear encouraging calls from some of the observers, but the sounds seemed distant and unimportant. Her entire focus was on maintaining the rhythm and technique that would carry her efficiently across the full 40-yard traverse. Halfway across the bars, Sarah felt the same temptation she had experienced during training to increase her pace. Her arms felt strong, and she knew she could move faster. But she stuck to her plan, maintaining the sustainable rhythm that would preserve her strength for the obstacles ahead. The parallel bar traverse was complete in what felt like seconds. Sarah dropped to the ground and immediately transitioned to the next obstacle, her confidence building with each successful execution. Her timing felt perfect, and her energy levels were exactly where they needed to be. The wall climb was next, and Sarah attacked it with the footwork techniques she had refined through countless repetitions. Her movement was fluid and efficient, with each step precisely placed to maximize upward progress while minimizing energy expenditure. She reached the top of the 12-foot wall and immediately prepared for the descent. The rope traverse that followed tested the efficiency gains Sarah had worked so hard to develop. This obstacle had been the downfall of many record attempts, coming at a point where accumulated fatigue began to affect grip strength and coordination. But Sarah's controlled approach to the earlier obstacles had preserved her strength for this critical section. Sarah mounted the rope and began the hand-over-hand traverse. Her technique was smooth and deliberate, with each movement calculated to maintain forward progress while distributing the workload across her entire upper body. She could feel the burn in her forearms, but it was manageable and within the limits she had tested during training. 20 feet later, Sarah completed the rope traverse and dropped to the ground for the next obstacle. She was now halfway through the course, and everything was proceeding exactly according to plan. Her technique was holding up under pressure, her pacing was sustainable, and her confidence continued to build. The crawling section that followed was where Sarah had found one of her biggest opportunities for improvement during training. While other attempts had treated this as an obstacle to endure, Sarah attacked it as a chance to gain time. Her modified technique was fluid and fast, allowing her to cover the 50 yards significantly faster than traditional military crawling methods. Sarah emerged from the crawling section breathing normally and feeling strong. The unconventional technique had worked exactly as planned, and she had gained precious seconds that could prove crucial for the overall record. The observers who had positioned themselves near this obstacle looked impressed by the speed and efficiency of her movement. The course's middle section included several obstacles that tested different aspects of fitness and technique. A tire run required quick feet and agility. A wall traverse tested upper body strength and endurance. A series of hurdles demanded explosive power and coordination. Sarah moved through each obstacle with the precision and efficiency she had developed during training. Her tire run was clean and fast, with no wasted movements or unnecessary steps. The wall traverse was completed using the modified technique that distributed effort across multiple muscle groups. The hurdles were cleared with textbook form that maximized speed while minimizing the energy cost of each jump. As Sarah approached the final third of the course, she felt something she hadn't expected. Despite having completed 8 of the 12 obstacles, she felt strong and controlled. Her breathing was elevated but manageable. Her muscles were working hard but weren't approaching failure. Her mind was clear and focused on the challenges ahead. This was the point in the course where many previous record attempts had begun to break down. The accumulated fatigue from the earlier obstacles would start to affect technique and speed, creating a downward spiral that made the final obstacles increasingly difficult. But Sarah's controlled approach to the earlier sections had preserved her physical and mental resources for the final push. The combination wall and rope climb loomed ahead, the most technically demanding obstacle on the course, and the one that had ended the hopes of many strong attempts. Sarah approached it with the same focused calm she had maintained throughout the entire run. The first wall climb was executed with the dynamic efficiency Sarah had practiced hundreds of times. Her movement was aggressive but controlled, with each handhold and foothold precisely placed to maximize upward progress. She reached the top of the wall and immediately transitioned to the rope traverse. This was the moment Sarah had trained for most specifically. The rope traverse at the end of the combination obstacle was where technique and fitness had to come together under maximum fatigue. Sarah mounted the rope and began the traverse, using the refined approach she and Rodriguez had developed during the final weeks of training. Her movement across the rope was smooth and controlled, with none of the jerky, desperate motions that characterized attempts by people who had pushed too hard on the earlier obstacles. Sarah's pace was steady and sustainable, and she completed the 20-foot traverse with her technique intact. The final wall descent was where Sarah could afford to be most aggressive. With only one major obstacle remaining after this, she could expend energy that she had carefully preserved throughout the earlier sections of the course. Sarah descended the 12-foot wall with controlled speed, her movements precise but dynamic. Only 2 obstacles remained: a final rope climb and a sprint to the finish line. Sarah approached the rope climb with the same technique she had used at the beginning of the course, her grip strength and upper body power still sufficient for clean execution. The climb was smooth and efficient, with Sarah reaching the top and beginning her descent without any loss of pace. The final sprint was where months of conditioning and pacing strategy would pay their ultimate dividend. While other record attempts reached this point in various states of exhaustion, Sarah felt strong enough to maintain a true sprint pace for the final 100 yards. Sarah hit the ground after the final rope climb and immediately accelerated into her closing sprint. Her legs felt fresh and powerful, her breathing was controlled, and her stride was long and efficient. She covered the final distance with increasing speed, crossing the finish line with energy to spare. Rodriguez stopped his watch and looked at the display, his expression unreadable. The other timekeepers converged on him to compare their measurements, while Sarah stood at the finish line catching her breath and trying to process what she had just accomplished. Sarah felt good about her performance. Every obstacle had been executed cleanly. Her pacing had been exactly what she had planned, and she had finished feeling strong rather than exhausted. But she also knew that feeling good about a performance and setting a record were two different things. Rodriguez approached her with his stopwatch, his expression still neutral. "How do you feel, Commander?" "Good," Sarah replied honestly. "Really good, like I executed the plan." Rodriguez nodded and looked at his stopwatch again. The other timekeepers had joined them, and there was a brief consultation to confirm that all three watches showed the same time. Finally, Rodriguez looked up at Sarah. "Commander, your official time is 11 minutes and 31 seconds. Sarah felt her heart skip a beat. That was 12 seconds faster than Torres's record. 12 seconds was an eternity in a course where improvements were typically measured in fractions of seconds. "Are you sure?" Sarah asked, hardly believing what she had heard. Rodriguez smiled for the first time that morning. "We're sure, Commander. You didn't just break the record, you destroyed it." The gathered observers erupted in cheers and applause. Captain Morrison approached with a broad smile, extending his hand in congratulation. Other instructors and SEAL candidates gathered around, their earlier skepticism replaced by genuine admiration and respect. But it was Rodriguez's reaction that meant the most to Sarah. The chief, who had spent 15 years watching some of the most elite athletes in the world attempt this same challenge, was looking at her with something approaching awe. "Commander," he said, "in all my years here, I have never seen anything like what you just did. That wasn't just a record-breaking performance. That was a demonstration of what's possible when intelligence and preparation meet perfect execution." Sarah felt a wave of satisfaction and relief wash over her. All the months of preparation, analysis, and training had been vindicated in the most decisive way possible. She hadn't just broken the record. She had shattered it in a way that would probably stand as the new standard for years to come. As the excitement around her continued, Sarah found herself thinking about the journey that had brought her to this moment. It had started with a casual comment during a meeting 6 months earlier, and had evolved into the most focused and intensive preparation of her life. But more than that, it had been a validation of an approach that many people had initially doubted. Sarah had proven that sometimes the key to achieving the impossible wasn't just trying harder than everyone else, but thinking differently about the challenge and finding new ways to solve old problems. The celebration continued around her, but Sarah felt a quiet sense of completion. She had set out to prove that intelligence, preparation, and technique could overcome barriers that had seemed insurmountable. The stopwatch had confirmed that she was right. 11 minutes and 31 seconds. A new record that represented not just personal achievement, but a new understanding of what was possible when traditional approaches were challenged by innovative thinking and meticulous preparation. The immediate aftermath of breaking the record was a blur of congratulations, photographs, and official documentation. Sarah found herself surrounded by SEAL instructors and candidates who wanted to understand exactly what they had just witnessed. Her time of 11 minutes and 31 seconds hadn't just broken Torres's decade-old record, it had obliterated it by a margin that many had thought impossible. Captain Morrison quickly took charge of the situation, ensuring that all proper documentation was completed for the official record recognition. The 3 timekeeper measurements were verified and logged. The video recording was secured and prepared for submission to Naval Special Warfare Command. Within hours, Sarah's achievement would be formally recognized and entered into the official records. But the immediate impact went far beyond paperwork and documentation. Word of Sarah's performance spread through the SEAL community at Coronado with remarkable speed. By lunchtime, instructors from other training programs were arriving to hear details about her techniques and approach. By afternoon, senior officers from Naval Special Warfare Command were making calls to understand what had happened and what it might mean for future training methods. Chief Rodriguez found himself in the unusual position of fielding questions from colleagues who wanted to understand how someone they'd never heard of had suddenly rewritten the standards for one of their most challenging assessments. His explanations about Sarah's analytical approach and innovative techniques sparked intense interest among instructors who had been using traditional methods for years. She didn't just train harder, Rodriguez explained to a group of senior instructors. She trained smarter. She identified inefficiencies in conventional approaches and developed better methods. Then she executed those methods flawlessly under pressure. The discussion that followed revealed something significant about the SEAL training community. Despite their reputation for being set in traditional ways, the instructors were genuinely interested in learning from Sarah's success. They wanted to understand her techniques, not to dismiss them, but to potentially incorporate them into their own training programs. Sarah spent the remainder of that day at Coronado, answering questions and demonstrating the techniques she had developed. Word had spread beyond the immediate SEAL community, and she found herself explaining her approach to instructors from other special operations units, exercise physiologists from the Naval Medical Center, and even some civilian researchers who studied elite athletic performance. The questions were detailed and technical. How had she identified the inefficiencies in traditional approaches? What specific training methods had she used to develop her techniques? How had she managed the mental pressure of a record attempt? Each question revealed the sophistication of her preparation and the depth of analysis that had gone into every aspect of her approach. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, an exercise physiologist from the Naval Medical Center, was particularly interested in Sarah's pacing strategy. Most elite performances are about pushing physiological limits, Dr. Walsh explained. But what you did was about optimizing efficiency within those limits. It's a completely different paradigm. Sarah found herself explaining the months of analysis that had led to her approach. She described studying videos of failed attempts and identifying patterns in how fatigue affected technique. She explained her research into efficiency methods from other sports and activities. She detailed the construction of practice obstacles and the systematic testing of different approaches. The breakthrough came when I stopped thinking about it as a test of maximum effort and started thinking about it as an optimization problem, Sarah told the gathered group. Instead of asking how hard I could push myself, I asked how efficiently I could move through each challenge. 1. The technical discussion continued for hours, with Sarah demonstrating specific techniques and explaining the reasoning behind each modification she had made to traditional approaches. The rope climbing technique that conserved grip strength, the parallel bar rhythm that maintained speed without causing failure, the modified crawling method that treated the obstacle as an opportunity rather than an endurance test. Each demonstration drew murmurs of understanding and appreciation from the watching instructors. These were people who understood physical challenges at the highest level, and they could immediately recognize the elegance and effectiveness of Sarah's innovations. But perhaps the most significant reaction came from the SEAL candidates who had been training on the course for months. Sarah's record had been set on the same obstacles they struggled with daily, using techniques that many of them could potentially learn and adapt. Petty Officer Second Class Mike Chen had been training at Coronado for 6 months and had completed the obstacle course dozens of times. His best time was 13 minutes and 45 seconds, which was considered respectable for a candidate still in training. "Commander," Chen said during one of the technical discussions, "do you think these techniques could help regular candidates improve their times?" Sarah considered the question carefully. Her techniques had been developed specifically for record-breaking performance, but many of the efficiency improvements she had identified could benefit anyone attempting the course. "I think some of the techniques could help anyone," Sarah replied. "The rope climbing method, for example, is more efficient, regardless of your fitness level. The parallel bar pacing could help people avoid the grip fatigue that causes most failures on that obstacle. Chief Rodriguez had been listening to this conversation with growing interest. As the primary instructor responsible for candidate training, he was always looking for ways to help his students improve their performance and, more importantly, avoid injuries that could end their SEAL aspirations. "Commander," Rodriguez said, "would you be willing to work with some of our candidates to test whether your techniques can be taught effectively?" The question opened up a possibility that Sarah hadn't initially considered. Her focus had been entirely on her own record attempt, but the idea of helping others improve their performance was appealing. It would also provide valuable data about whether her innovations were broadly applicable or only effective for someone with her specific background and capabilities. Over the following weeks, Sarah found herself in an unofficial teaching role at Coronado. Working with Rodriguez and other instructors, she developed training protocols that introduced candidates to her modified techniques. The results were impressive and immediate. Candidates who learned Sarah's rope climbing technique showed significant improvements in their times and, more importantly, were able to maintain their grip strength for subsequent obstacles. The parallel bar pacing method helped reduce the failure rate on that obstacle by over 30%. Even the modified crawling technique, which had seemed most specific to Sarah's own capabilities, proved teachable and effective for candidates with various body types and fitness levels. The improvements weren't just in times, though those were significant. Candidates using Sarah's techniques were completing the course feeling less exhausted and more confident. The efficiency gains were reducing the overall physical and mental stress of the challenge, which had positive effects on everything from injury rates to psychological readiness for other aspects of training. Word of these improvements reached higher levels of Naval Special Warfare Command more quickly than anyone had anticipated. Within a month of Sarah's record, she received a call from Rear Admiral Patricia Hayes, the commanding officer of Naval Special Warfare Command. "Commander Mitchell," Admiral Hayes said, "I understand you've managed to improve not just record performance, but training outcomes across the board at Coronado. I'd like to discuss the possibility of formalizing your contributions to our training programs." The conversation that followed led to an opportunity that Sarah hadn't expected. Admiral Hayes wanted her to lead a comprehensive review of physical training methods across all Naval Special Warfare programs. The goal was to identify other areas where analytical approaches and technical innovations could improve both performance and safety. "What you accomplished at Coronado suggests that we may have been accepting limitations that aren't actually limitations," Admiral Hayes explained. "I want you to apply that same analytical approach to our entire training system." Sarah accepted the assignment, which represented a significant shift in her career trajectory. Instead of returning to her intelligence duties, she would be spending the next year working directly with training commands to identify and implement improvements in how the Navy developed its most elite operators. The project began with a systematic analysis of training programs at facilities across the country. Sarah and her team studied everything from basic conditioning methods to advanced tactical training exercises. They analyzed injury rates, performance metrics, and dropout statistics. They interviewed instructors, candidates, and graduates to understand which aspects of training were most effective and which might be improved. What they found was both encouraging and concerning. The existing training programs were highly effective at producing capable operators, but they were also more inefficient than they needed to be. Many training methods had been developed decades earlier and had never been systematically evaluated or updated. Some approaches that had been state-of-the-art in the 1,980 seconds were still being used, without consideration of improvements in exercise science, psychology, or equipment. Sarah's analysis identified dozens of opportunities for improvement, ranging from small technical adjustments to major programmatic changes. Some improvements were immediately implementable, like the obstacle course techniques she had already introduced at Coronado. Others would require longer-term development and testing. One of the most significant findings was related to injury prevention. Sarah's data analysis revealed that many training injuries were caused not by the inherent dangers of the activities, but by inefficient techniques that placed unnecessary stress on joints and connective tissues. Her climbing techniques, for example, not only improved performance but significantly reduced shoulder and elbow injuries among candidates. The injury prevention implications were enormous. Every training injury not only caused personal hardship for the affected candidate, but also represented a significant investment in training time and resources that was lost. If Sarah's technical improvements could reduce injury rates across the entire special operations community, the benefits would extend far beyond improved performance times. As her analysis progressed, Sarah found herself working with research teams from universities and private companies that specialized in human performance optimization. Her record-breaking achievement had attracted attention from the broader scientific community, and researchers wanted to understand the principles that had made her success possible. Dr. Michael Thompson, a biomechanics researcher from Stanford University, spent several weeks at Coronado studying Sarah's techniques and their effects on movement efficiency. His analysis confirmed what Sarah had intuited through her own training. What Commander Mitchell has done, Dr. Thompson explained in his preliminary report, is identify and exploit inefficiencies in conventional movement patterns that have been accepted as optimal for decades. Her innovations represent genuine advances in our understanding of efficient human movement under stress. The scientific validation of Sarah's approach had implications that extended beyond military training. Athletes in various sports began experimenting with adaptations of her techniques. Rock climbers adopted her rope climbing methods. Obstacle race competitors incorporated her pacing strategies. Even firefighters and emergency responders began training with modified versions of her efficiency-focused approaches. But the most significant impact remained within the military community, where Sarah's work was systematically transforming how elite units approached physical training. 6 months after her record-breaking performance, training programs at facilities across the country were incorporating elements of her analytical approach and technical innovations. The results were measurable and impressive. Average completion times for the Coronado obstacle course had improved by over 8% across all candidates. Injury rates during physical training had decreased by 15%. Most importantly, candidate confidence and morale had improved significantly as people found themselves capable of achievements they had previously thought impossible. Sarah's own role evolved as well. What had started as a personal challenge to break a long-standing record had become a career focused on helping others achieve their maximum potential. She found herself traveling between training facilities, working with instructors to implement new methods and analyze their effectiveness. A year after her record-breaking run, Sarah was invited to return to Coronado for a ceremony recognizing the impact of her contributions to naval special warfare training. The event was attended by senior officers from across the special operations community, along with instructors and candidates who had benefited from her innovations. Captain Morrison, who had given Sarah the opportunity to attempt the record in the first place, introduced her to the assembled group. "Commander Mitchell came to us with a simple question," Morrison said. "She asked if she could attempt our obstacle course record. What we didn't realize was that she was really asking whether we were willing to challenge our assumptions about what was possible." As Sarah looked out at the audience, she saw faces that represented the ongoing impact of what had started as a personal challenge. There were instructors who were using her techniques to help their students achieve better outcomes with lower injury rates. There were candidates who were succeeding in programs where they might have failed under the old methods. There were senior officers who were applying her analytical approach to other aspects of training and operations. The formal recognition was gratifying, but what meant more to Sarah was the knowledge that her work was continuing to help people achieve their goals and serve their country more effectively. The record itself had been just the beginning of something much larger and more meaningful. Standing at the same obstacle course where she had broken Torres's decade-old record, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. It had started with curiosity about whether conventional approaches were really optimal. It had continued through months of analysis, preparation, and testing. It had culminated in a performance that had exceeded even her own expectations. But the real achievement wasn't the 11 minutes and 31 seconds that had been recorded that morning. The real achievement was the demonstration that intelligent analysis and innovative thinking could push the boundaries of human performance in ways that pure effort alone could not. Sarah's record still stood, and probably would for years to come. But more importantly, her approach had changed how an entire community thought about training and performance. She had proven that sometimes the best way to achieve the impossible wasn't to try harder than everyone else, but to think differently about what was truly possible. As the ceremony concluded and Sarah prepared to return to her ongoing work with training commands around the country, she felt a deep satisfaction that went beyond personal achievement. She had used her unique background and analytical skills to make a contribution that would benefit thousands of people for years to come. The question she had asked Captain Morrison a year earlier, "Mind if I attempt it?" had led to much more than a broken record. It had led to a fundamental reconsideration of human potential and the methods used to develop it. And that, Sarah knew, was a legacy worth the months of preparation and the brief moments of effort that had made it all possible.